make your own mistakes, you realize that, hey, I won't do that again. I promise you. And in 96, I promised myself that no matter what was going on with the leaders, I would just sit back and watch.
Hello and welcome into Running for Coverage, Episode 9. It's been a little bit of an off and on schedule for us here this summer, and I'll give you a good excuse for that one here in just a moment, but we're very excited about today's episode because we get to welcome the voice you just heard, 1996 Olympic marathoner Keith Brantly. We've had Keith on giving some running tips throughout the course of the podcast, but this is the first time we've been able to sit down and talk with him as our featured guest of the pod. And well, we just had some great stories that we'll be able to share with you about his trials with the trials, call them the trials of the travails or vice versa, going through the Olympic trials 3 times and failing, and finally on his 4th attempt making the U.S. Olympic team and what he learned in that process. And Keith will also give us a little bit of a training tip. He admits that some of these are obvious when you talk about how to train in the heat, but if you're like me, you sort of get into this rhythm as a runner that you're going to go out and run, and then it's the way it is. Regardless of the weather or the time of year or anything else, it's like, listen, I have an expectation. This is how it's going to be. Well, of course, it can't be when it gets hot. So we'll talk about that coming up here in just a moment. Typically, we talk a lot about the races that have just gone by, but so this week I want to do something a little bit different. I want to focus on 2 local runners who had just phenomenal performances in the ultra category. One is Mark Burgett, who we've had on the podcast, and as you know, I feel like Mark is the most impressive athlete, local athlete in a way that I've covered. Just amazing runner, and he decided he was going to do 7 days of marathon length runs. And each one of them was tagged to a different one of the Disney dwarfs, the Snow White dwarfs. So the 7 dwarfs marathons, 7 days, that accounts to 184 miles, 180, I did the math, 184 point something miles. And the fact that he was able to do that and keep up his pace, just remarkable. He had one quote unquote bad marathon that went 3 hours and 9 minutes. Everything else was below that, and his last race was his fastest. And in total, he averaged under 3 hours for the 7 runs. So just amazing. So hats off once again to Mark Burgett. The other is Regina Sui, who we will have on the podcast here at some point. She ran the 500K Vol State run in Tennessee, and pretty remarkable there. 8 days, 500K. So hats off again to Regina, who just has an amazing ability to just keep going. And we'll talk with her about that on the podcast coming up here in the coming months. But here and now, we will let you know that coming up, we have the Tour de Pain this weekend. Starts, I guess, next weekend on Friday. That'll be a good one to look forward to. And I also want to remind you to enter as a subscriber on our newsletter. It comes out mostly every week. Just to subscribe, the best way to do that is to either follow me on Twitter at Cole Pepper or connect with us at Running for Coverage on Instagram, and we'll have that for you. With that, we give away something each and every week, or rather each and every month, something from our sponsors. And this month we're giving away two entries into the Clay County Invitational Cross Country that's coming up later on, the inaugural running of that event. All right. A couple of observations. The reasons why it's been a little bit off and on here. We've been doing a lot of traveling this summer. We just got back from the Pacific Northwest, which is just beautiful. Had the opportunity to go to the Nike company store, thanks to a friend, and was able to check out. I got some new Nike running shoes I'm going to try out. I've never been able to find Nikes that sort of fit my foot, but was able to there. Maybe my foot's smaller, or maybe they just have the right selection there at the Nike company store. So we'll check that. I know some of you are big Nike devotees in terms of running. We do not take any sort of endorsement fees from Nike or New Balance or Asics or Hoka or anybody here on the show. But when we do our gear reviews, those are pure gear reviews. We're not taking that from anybody. So in lieu of a gear review this week, I'll let you know that I'm going to be going out and running in these Nike shoes and seeing how they compare to some of the other ones that I've run in. So that'll be coming up here in just a bit. I also was able to just enjoy the weather. There was hot for the Northwest, as it has been pretty much everywhere here this summer, but the evenings were just amazing. A lack of humidity, and did some hiking. That doesn't not It's not quite training for a half marathon, but did some hiking. We hiked up to Ramona Falls on the shoulders of Mount Hood, and that was fantastic. Certainly felt it in the legs the next day. But if you have a chance to get up to some elevation, whether that's in Colorado or Asheville or other parts of the Appalachians or all the way out at the Cascades, a great time to do it here in the summer. All right, without further ado, let's bring in the 1996 Olympian, Keith Brantly. We've had him on the podcast before giving training tips, but now a chance to really dig into his running history. Here is my conversation with Keith. It's hard to find somebody with your pedigree in our area, and I think there's so much that we can learn from you. But I want to go back a little bit biographically, and get from you what your introduction to the sport was, and when did it really click with you that hey, this is something that's not only going to be something I can pursue in school, but also perhaps beyond that, and something that's going to be a part of your life forever.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Cole. I appreciate it. And you do this is just a great format. Really do appreciate everything you're doing and the work you're doing. It's a great program, and I'm excited to be here and be part of it. I started actually running by accident. Literally, I was about 11 years old, and I was on a powerboat with some friends, and I grew up in Winter Haven, Florida, and specifically on Lake Hamilton, and got bounced out of the bow of the boat, and the boat went over me and cut my foot wide open, and the only thing holding my heel on was my Achilles tendon. Fast forward about 2 years later, and I had lost all the nerves in my right foot, pretty much all of the nerves in my right foot. But one of the radiologists that was on the team that was working with me, my foot specifically, was also a neighbor. He was also training for, back then, this was 1976-ish, for the Boston Marathon. And nobody even knew what these people were doing. They just thought they were nuts. Why are you running? Are you running away from somebody? And I, he saw me actually in the front yard. My foot had healed, and I was being chased by one of my brothers. And I ran out in the road. This guy was running by the front by our house, and I figured an adult could save my life, because my brother was ready to kill me. And he said, "Yeah, come on, run with me. I'll run with me to the end of the road." Well, the end of our road was a mile down, and of course a mile back. And from there, I just kind of caught the bug. I started watching running on track and field on TV. I saw the World Cup. I saw Maurice Yifter just smoke Craig Virgin, and I think it was the World Cup. And I saw Frank Shorter, win a silver in Montreal. And I said to my dad, I said, "That's what I want to do."
It's interesting because back then, uh, obviously there were far fewer channels. All you had were the networks and PBS, maybe some local stuff. Um, but you would have these big meets that would show up on Wide World of Sports, or if ABC in those days was usually the one carrying the Olympics, they might have something as part of their Olympic preview. You couldn't find it everywhere, but when you found it, I feel like the coverage back then was pretty good, all things considered, compared to a lot of the other non-major sports that you could get. they would really sink their teeth into a day of programming at the World Championships or what have you. So maybe pretty fortunate that was the case from a television standpoint, that kind of bring you into show you what the elites looked like at that point.
Well, you had three stations: ABC, well, four: ABC, NBC, CBS, and PBS. That was it. And you didn't have cable. You didn't have a lot of content out there. So things that, like the Olympics, and even distance running was televised. So it was a big deal back then. Now there's obviously a lot of different things that people can watch, but I mean, for me, it was just, it was the simple fact that, my dad was a runner. He grew up in Ocala. He ran about a 4:32 mile when he was in high school, which back then was on cinders. They were lucky they had shoes. My dad grew up very poor, and I felt like I had some talent and legs and lungs. And I really had some great mentors. I got good in high school. We had sophomore, junior, and senior. We had a junior high school, and so that's where I started running. And I think I had like a 4:56 mile my ninth grade year, and then I improved it to a 4:27 mile my sophomore year. By the time my senior year was over, I ran like a 4:16 mile and about a 9:09 2 mile. So not bad, not great, but not bad.
What was the time? Do you remember posting a time that really meant something to you? What was it, when you beat your dad's best mile, or was there something else where that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, I tell people this all the time. I think out of the probably 500 to 600 races I've run in my life, I've run one perfect race, and that was the high school state cross country championships here in Florida. I ran. I'd been beaten like a drum all year long by this one guy named Basil McGee, who was my competitor from Largo High School. Basil owned me basically in the last 100 meters of every race, and he out sprinted me constantly. He was a good miler too. Up until I think 2 years ago, he still had the state record in the mile, and I think that was a race by Reinhard Harrison. But Basil could easily run 55 seconds for his last lap in a mile, even on a fast pace. And he just would toy with me in cross country. And we just decided that I would take him out and go out as hard as I possibly could. If I died, I died. And we went out the first mile, I think it was 4:27, and he was nowhere to be seen. And I thought, well, he's probably, I didn't really care. I just focused in on what I had to do. And I ended up winning. I think I ran 14:18 for 3 miles. We didn't have 5K back then. But, you can do the conversion. Not a bad time. Of course, this was in DeLand, which is as flat as a pancake, but I'll take it. It was, for me, it was the kind of culmination of a good high school career. Got me in front of some really good schools, and I chose to go to Florida.
And you go to Florida and have an excellent career there as well. The trajectory for a runner, particularly a distance runner, from high school to college, I've always thought is uh, pretty steep. I mean, you can see a stud runner in high school go to a big school and just get buried on the list. So how long did it take you at Florida to get where you wanted to be?
It didn't take long. Again, I've been really fortunate to have some great mentors and great training partners in my life, and whether they liked it, me or not, I was going to run with them. And I'll be the first to admit it. I'm one of the most annoying people there is on the face of the earth to run with, because I complain, I whine. I would much rather be drinking a beer.
This is why we get along so well.
Yeah. Uh, but and I don't really like running as an activity. It's not something I just crave to do. I love to race, and if allowing me to race means I have to train, then I'll do that. But my freshman year, I actually ended up finishing. I believe I was fourth or fifth, I think fifth in the SEC cross country championships, which is not bad for a freshman, a true freshman. And then I ended up actually qualifying for the NCAA championships in cross country as a freshman. So I didn't have a bad start. In my freshman year, I ended up running in the World Cross Country Championships, finishing third overall, and we ended up winning the team title as well. Now that was pre-Ethiopia, pre-Kenya, but we still had some great runners to compete against on the European side. And then right after that, I ended up running 29, I believe it was 29:13 for 10K at the Penn Relays, and won the Penn Relays in a sprint finish over Ray Tracy, who now is the coach at Providence and the brother of John Tracy.
So
So
pretty good competition right
so
there. And
I knew pretty much then when I was competing, when I finished third at the World Cross Country Championships, I'm like thinking, yeah, I think I'm gonna make this my gig for a while, because I had no marketable skills. I'm not good looking. I'm not that bright, and in the end, running was kind of a ticket for me.
you mentioned, lungs and legs. How much do you think that has been nurture versus nature? In other words, did your genes play a big role, or did something else play a big role in you being able to run fast for a sustained period of time?
Yeah, yeah, you can't pick your parents. So genetics. If you looked at my parents when they were in their, mid 30s or so, you'd say, these are really skinny, long-legged people. Both my mom and my dad had really long legs. Now I don't know if genetically that's, pass to become a good runner. Both were smokers, and then of course they smoked when we were growing up. So I actually have, a fairly bad case of asthma. My oldest brother almost died, and he's actually, thank goodness, he's alive, because he's a world-renowned pulmonologist, and does a tremendous amount of research on some very nasty pulmonary diseases. So things work out well. But yeah, no, genetically, I think I had the physical tools, but I think, one thing I learned, about the same time I started, just before I started running, I also raced sailboats, because my dad bought a sailboat, a Hobie Cat 14, right after I got injured, because it was the only thing I could actually really do. And of course, I think my parents also wanted me to get away from the house because I talked a lot. But he bought this sailboat, and I immediately started racing it. And I was competing against, here's a 12-year-old kid competing against 40-year-olds. And I was doing pretty well in that. I will say I wasn't great at it, but I won my fair share of races. And, being as young as I was, I thought I had it. I actually thought I was going to go to the Olympics in sailing.
What was your
I
first thought?
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
was that was really what I was. I thought I had to kind of a short list of universities that I was considering, which were kind of sailing based universities. Tufts, Tulane had good sailing teams and things like that. And I'm thinking of this when I'm 12 already, so I'm already I'm a planner, number one, and I guess the other piece of this is that I I I hate, like everybody, I hate to lose. Um, I'm I'm not a sore loser, but it is something that kind of sits with me very, very poorly after I lose. And during a race, I just, I'm fanatical when it comes to, competing. I often, to the point where it doesn't bring on good race tactics. I can be very impetuous, so let my emotions get ahead of me. And that continued throughout in my career. But once I got it right, I mean, every once in a while I got it right.
Well, let me fast forward to some of those occasions where you were working on getting it right, and that being, the Olympic trials. And the, you know, I'm fascinated by the process of competing in the Olympic trials. We've talked to Kelsey Pontius about this. She's running for the second time in the marathon trials, and she's thinking, I think I can, maybe finish in the top X of this group. But when you're only getting three chosen out of the Olympic trials for the marathon to go on to the Olympics, that's a tall order. So sometimes you're competing to get to the Olympic trials, but if you're on the elite level as you were, you're competing to get to the Olympic trials, to be in the right position, and then to be able to be in that top three to make it to the Olympics. So what was your experience like in mentally and physically preparing for the Olympic trials as you tried to make it to your ultimate dream?
Yeah. I became much better at not making Olympic teams than making Olympic teams. I can tell you that much. And for my level, 1984 was my first Olympic trials in 10,000 meters, and I didn't even make it out of the heats. And I think I was maybe seventh or eighth at the NCAAs a couple of months earlier. Um, I was, wasn't that, it's just the timing was not right that early. But then in '88, I ran the 5 in the 10,000 meters, and I thought I would make the team pretty easily in the 10. I really did. I thought I was pretty much a lock. I think I even had the Olympic qualifier, the Olympic standard. So even, I would have finishing third, I would have, still made the team. But I failed miserably. I ended up third, and then I ended up running the 5,000 just as a lark, and ended up fourth in that. I missed the team, or third place by 1.87 seconds. I didn't have the Olympic qualifier, but I was pretty sure I was going to get it. I was not far off of it. So I mean, in the end, I mean, I think for me, you visualize things, you pretend you're in training. Running is so boring. You have to think about things that you visualize. And I always visualize myself not just making the team, but actually competing in the Olympic Games. I visualized the venue. I pulled out pictures of the venue, everything. And so for me, it was not even making the team wasn't the hard part. It was so much, it was like, was I going to win a medal? That's how I thought. Of course, the chances of me winning a medal at the age of 26 in the 10,000, was, very slim. No one would have to show up. But in the end, it became difficult making the team. And it was self-inflicted wounds. In '92, when I think I had a pretty good shot at making the team in the marathon, uh, I broke away at about 13 miles. You couldn't have told me I wasn't going to win the race at 15. At 18, I was like still feeling pretty good. At 19, the wheels were coming off, and I got past 1, 2, 3, and that was it. I hung on for fourth, and it was again heartbreaking. But again, it was self-inflicted, and I think one of the reasons why I continued on after that, because I was 30 at the time, was when you make your own mistakes, you realize that hey, I won't do that again. I promise you. And in '96, I promised myself that no matter what was going on with the leaders, I would just sit back and watch, and just, sit back in this bubble of guys. Because one, it was really cold. I was freezing to death. But I got centered around, 15 or 20 guys and just stayed there. And even though, it was tempting to go out and break away, because I had run the course the year before and won the national championships on the course, and in not a bad time either. But the course was difficult. But when I looked back, failure was really written in impetuousness. And for me to not live that same you know tragedy, I needed to sit back and let the race come to me. And that meant I probably wouldn't win the race, but I would make the team. And if I didn't make that team, that was probably going to be my last shot.
And I was going to say at that point, at that age, you had to think that this was it. So take us through the last couple of miles there, because after you sat in that pack, there was a moment something had to trigger your mind and your body to say, okay, now it's time to make a move.
Yeah, well, I think it was maybe around 18 miles. And again, a lot of it's a blur because it was a very, very cold day. And, it was a really difficult course, very hilly course. And Bob Kempinen put in some pretty big surges. He ran a couple of 440 miles in the middle of the race. he was clearly, throwing down the gloves. And Mark Coogan, was covering kind of loosely. I was covering a little more tightly on Bob, only because it was also a little bit windy too, and I didn't want to be stuck out there in no man's land and I wanted to be able to hold on to it. And I didn't think that the pace that he was running at was out of my scope. But then Mark pulled up, and I thought, okay, right now we got a 3-man race. Right at about, I think it was at about 20 miles or so, they had a water station, 21 miles. I had the number one number because I had won the national championships. Bob was number 3. And he was actually running ahead of me at that point. And we went to the water station, and it looked like he was getting ready to miss his water bottle, which would have been probably one of the last water bottles we had. He went to grab it, and he actually did a 360-degree pirouette, and looked at me as he did this and backhanded his bottle, and got it. And I thought, well, he's won. It's over with there, because I'm just hanging on for dear life. But it got back to him, because I think it was maybe at about 22 miles. He had put in a big surge, and there was a group of cyclists riding right beside us, but off the course, of course. And all of a sudden, I look up and I see this green dye coming off of his head, and I'm thinking to myself, why would somebody hit him with a water balloon filled with green dye? These are the things, that stupid stuff that goes through your head, when you're racing. But I'm thinking, what is going on here? And I realize he's kind of doubling over. He's actually throwing up.
Oh.
And he's throwing up Gatorade, or whatever sports drink he was drinking. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, maybe this is an opportunity and stuff. But, he sped up. I think it was a relief for him, because his stomach was bothering him so much. He took off and put in a couple of more surges, and he was going to be clear of us. And it was just between me and Mark. And we looked back, we knew we made the team. And it was just a matter of, how gracious or gentlemanly he and I wanted to be with each other. And I knew he was, looking pretty good. I just wanted to hang on, because I did not want to screw this up.
Mm-hmm.
And the way for me to screw it up was...
Is there any conversation at that point? Are you guys, in the last couple of miles, and hey, all you have to do is not fall down a manhole somewhere,
Yeah.
and you probably have. Do you talk?
Well, yeah. I mean, a couple of things. First of all, things are going through your head. First of all, is this really true? Because again, remember, this would have been, if I had missed this team, it would have been the 5th time I missed the team. And again, very, very close as well. So I was very nervous about it, and I wasn't going to assume that I made the team until I crossed that finish line. I can tell you that much. But Mark and I did. Mark turned to me and says, "We got this, Keith." And at that point, I couldn't even respond, because I was hurting so bad. But I knew that, we were going to make, it was pretty much a lock if I didn't just start cramping. And everybody who watches this show knows how difficult the marathon is, and how quickly your fortunes can turn bad. And so I was not assuming that I was going to make the team until I crossed that line.
So then you have what? Almost a year between the Olympic trials and the games in Atlanta.
Oh gosh, I wish. And it's
how long did you have?
We only had, that was February. We only had August.
And okay.
Yeah. And there's a really very prolific photographer. His name is Victor, not Victor, Victor Saylor, because he's a New York fireman, or was. Victor has photographed every road race in the 80s, early 80s and 90s, all the way to today, every track meet out there. And he was telling me after the race, he saw us at the podium and at the press conference, and he says, "I've never seen 3 guys more beaten up than you guys. You guys didn't have any color in your skin. It was gray." And one was because it was 28 degrees for the start of the race. And I think it was only 29 when we finished. And this course was just brutal. The only thing that this course had in, preparing for Atlanta was the hills, of course, because it was so cold. And I couldn't walk normally for about a month.
So how did you get from not walking normally to being able to line up at the start line for the Olympic marathon? What was your preparation like?
It was a lot of it was just being very ginger with myself. I knew that I had a lot of good fitness going into the trials. I just didn't want to, take any time off. So after the trials, I made sure I was trying to jog and make sure I kept my base fitness. And when I was ready, I went to North Carolina and started training in Asheville, or excuse me, in Brevard, North Carolina. And there's nothing else to do except run. And so we made sure that I was staying healthy, number one. Number two, not trying to overtrain. The biggest mistake I think a lot of elite runners make is when they make the team, they try to get better. And you run the risk, because there's compressed time between the trials and the Olympic Games. You run the risk of trying to do too much in a very short period of time. And one of the biggest mistakes is people just try to get better. And you're already good. You made the damn Olympic team. you know, be happy with that so far and just try not to get injured. And so that's really was the plan. Aside from kind of an eye injury, I was running out there and I ran into a bush that had some thorns on it. Had to, get a thorn removed in my eye. That's probably the only drama that had happened. But yeah, it was tricky. I didn't have any illusions that I was. I mean, I knew that for me to win a medal in the games, the weather would have to be absolutely horrible. And what I mean by that, it would have to probably be 90 degrees at the start. And it would be, just terrible conditions, because that's the only kind of conditions I would thrive under. And the
Trying to
only way
get
I
that
could probably make the
Florida
team.
kid a benefit of running when it was like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a confidence thing too. I mean, I knew how to start races and finish really, really hot races. So, but it was pleasant at the start. It was probably 72, 73 degrees. It's just a hilly course. I ended up finishing 28th. I was the first American. Bob had a hamstring injury, which again was probably a legacy from the marathon in Charlotte. Um, I think Mark had a kind of a niggling injury going into the games as well. They didn't finish very far behind me, but I think Bob only finished 20 seconds behind me, even with an injury. But he's a 2:08 guy. I was only a 2:12 guy. I think at least from my perspective, finishing 28th when you're ranked, I was probably maybe 70th in the world. It's not a bad thing. Would I have liked to finish higher? Sure. But I think I ran probably one of my best races. I did not have, I, I never pushed the pace hard. I never tried to get on TV and, show up on TV by leading and things like that. I tried to run a conservative race that would get me into a higher place. And at one point, I think I was maybe 15th or so, around maybe 17 miles, but I just didn't have it that day. It was just, I ran out of fuel toward the end, and it just had to really struggle home.
Great stories and perspective on
Thanks.
the struggle to get there and then to be able to compete at literally
12
the highest
years.
level on the planet.
Yeah, 12 years. I mean, I tell people this all the time. Just don't assume that, just because you have one bad, race doesn't mean you can't recycle yourself and go for it again. It's just, I obviously had a lot of support. I had good, New Balance was my shoe sponsor, and they supported me through thick and thin. And I was one of the lucky few. But I will say that, don't attach an age to your performance. Just keep running. Don't let the age, you know, uh, determine how you're going to compete and when you're going to compete, and for how long.
All right, let's change directions here a little bit and talk about uh, some of the things you sent out in your email, which is, training in the heat. And we've talked about this from a nutrition standpoint with Kelsey and Mike Ryan in terms of recovering and so forth. But uh, this has already been one of the hottest summers on record worldwide. It has been a very hot summer in Jacksonville and in the state of Florida and elsewhere. Fires around the country. So let's walk through some of the tips for training in the summertime heat and what to watch out for to try to keep yourself under control so you can accomplish your goals.
Yeah. It's Kim calls me Captain Obvious because a lot of these things are the obvious things, but they're not so obvious to some people. I think a lot of training in the heat and humidity is avoiding the heat and humidity. There are a lot of people that seem to still think that they should train at 12 o'clock in the afternoon when the temperature is 90 degrees, the humidity is at 80, and it's not sustainable. And I don't know if it actually helps you. I don't think it actually helps you improve. I think it makes you, it extends your recovery, from that particular workout. So, get out early before the sun comes up. That radiant heat does nothing but, help to increase your core temperature. So avoid, if you can, train in the very early mornings. Or Mark Nenow, who is a great 10,000 meter runner, used to train in the middle of the night, basically. He used to get out at 10 o'clock at night and train. So whatever you're comfortable with, but take that one factor, the sun, out of it. The other thing too is that I am a big believer in monitoring your weight, both pre-run and post-run. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about your total weight. I care less what you weigh in total. I'm concerned with the difference, the differential. I ask folks, the people that I coach, to weigh themselves without clothes on before they go out to run. And then when they come back to run, weigh themselves again without clothes on. And look at that weight differential. And, to avoid if you've lost more than 2% of your total weight, your body weight, between your pre-run and your post-run weight, you've gotten too dehydrated. There are a lot of studies out there that suggest that muscle function core really starts to dive when you start to lose 2% or more of your weight. And what they mean by that is that it's not fat. I wish I could say I was going to lose fat, but it's all fluid. I'll go out and work in the yard for 3 hours and I will lose 5 or 6 pounds, and it's all water weight.
All right, so as we mentioned, no gear review this week. I will promise you my own personal gear review coming up here in a few weeks once I'm able to put some miles in on those new shoes. And if you would like to give us a gear review, you can email me at runningforcoverage@gmail.com, and we can set things up and we'll have some gear reviews from other runners in the community here in our area. Again, a reminder to subscribe to our Running for Coverage newsletter. It comes out each and every week, probably more so now going forward, now that we're sort of out of the travel thick of traveling in the summer. We look forward to that, and we look forward to seeing you out there running around Jacksonville and elsewhere. Thanks so much for watching and listening to Running for Coverage. We'll talk to you next week.